So I'm Tom O'Byrne. I was born in Terranure in Dublin, actually, and went to school in Dublin and grew up there until I was a sort of a late teenager. The family fortunes fluctuated in the wrong direction from my point of view. I found myself wanting, I liked the idea of being an orthopedic surgeon or something like that. I liked all that kind of thing, but I went to England, and my father went to England when we went bankrupt, as it were. The family followed us over there eventually. We stayed there for a number of years, just not very many years, but I went to Australia and started my exploring over there. And so it was my own fascination for the world that had me sort of doing my overland trips from Australia to here as well. And generally, I was working at very interesting sort of work over there. I went into all sorts of mining and into I was eventually working in North Queensland, and I had a research vessel there made by de Havilland in Sydney, and it was to help the mining company do research and to do sampling processes and all that ahead of their encroachment into new land. And it meant that I spent nearly 11 years doing that kind of thing, and it meant that every 8 weeks we had 5 weeks off, and it was a possibility then to see all the other parts of that side of the world and do studies in New Guinea and all these places, and then come back overland to Ireland every now and again. And it was all very adventurous and very interesting. But the family stayed at this side of the world. One of my sisters went over there as well to Australia. She was a nurse in northern Queensland and in the islands around the Torres Straits. And I came back after 10 years and bought this place. And then my brother and one of my sisters looked after the place while I was away, because they asked me to come back again. It was nice for my ego to be invited back to have a rebuilt vessel, and the crew, I still had some of the old crew, and we were involved with the IUCN and CSIRO and so on, as well as the company, and they were paying the bills, of course, Comalco Aluminum Corporation, and it was all very interesting work. And of course, when somebody leaves that sort of job and comes home here, they say he's gone home to die, you know. So even though I worked from then on more, I retired when I was 30, if you like, at that stage, and I've been working for myself ever since. So it's an interesting sort of, but it's driven by my own interest and my own passion in the environment and so on. And so I find myself approaching everything as an ecologist. I approach all the other subjects through that ecological way of thinking. Like if you apply that ecological approach to religion or history or any other subject, you go right back to the essence of what gave rise to as far as we can, the story from its origins. And it's very interesting because you cut through an awful lot of the tripe that's been added to it in the meantime, and people's points of view and all sorts of political and other reasons why they make everything sound perfectly okay, where the victors tend to write the stories anyway, you know, so the poor old people who were there originally get hardly a mention. But it's an interesting way of approaching any particular subject, by going right back to the essence of it and going right back as far as you can, and you cut through an awful lot of what developed in the meantime. But from my own point of view, I'm self-driven and self-educated in nearly everything, and you never stop educating yourself if you've got that kind of mindset. You're all the time at school, and you're all the time listening and learning, and what you believe is only what you believe up to where you have found that what you thought you believed needs to be improved. Then I believe from there on again. You know, there's nothing set in stone. Everything has to be improved on. So no matter what you think yesterday, if you've discovered something in the meantime about what you thought you understood yesterday, today you're that better off, you're a bit better informed, and that's the way to keep going. And then you stay in front of the posse that way, you know, and you learn what is really close to what's happening. This place is very interesting. It was originally, of course, carved out thousands of years ago after the Ice Age. There was a glacier up here melting, and there's 5 of these glens in a row. There's Goulding's Glen, Glen, Monard, and several others out along here. This is the only one with trees still in it. The people occupying this glen down through the centuries didn't clear fell it. So we're lucky, and the place is a little piece of how Ireland used to look one time, if you like. But it's got the Blarney River coming through, and we've got 30-foot waterfall here, another one below, and there's another one. There's 3 big waterfalls and a few small ones in here. And there's a nice edge of the forest water-like habitat for quite a lot of different forms of life that live in here. But it was a mill, and it was a row of mills. There were 4 mills working here making shovels. It was a shovel mills, and it was very interesting in that while this was always a waterfall, they formally built it so that it would hold more water in the top pond. And they'd start work in the morning in this mill here, using the water here, and then this pond would fill up in the summertime when the water was scarce. They'd start later on, and the fellows in the bottom pond would work all through the night because their pond would have filled up and they could sleep in the day and work in the night through, or whatever, you know. So there was a way of making sense of it all, and there were 8 water wheels working in here. And so it was very much a medieval sort of situation, and it was very crude machinery and very skilled men. They could make beautiful tools, shovels, slans, graffons, hay knives and forks, and you name it, little rudders for boats and all sorts of stuff. Beautifully made, nicely tempered, nicely finished, nicely presented. There was about 100 men involved in the whole process here. They had a whole series of horses and carts to go all over the country to distribute them all. And everybody got their shovels and slans, especially the slans for cutting turf, from here. And it was made here. I find little bits of them around the place. They had a pride in their work here, and if they were making something and it went wrong, rather than sort of admit that it was wrong and leave it hanging around, they'd throw it out in the bushes. So I can find slightly decomposing, half-made things that were, you know, weren't they weren't as perfect as they should have been. But the place produced up to 1960, from 1792 until 1960, the place produced extraordinary amounts of shovels and spades, and there were special spades for digging, spuds too, all sorts of fascinating things. We have samples of them. In fact, samples of all the things made here were given to the museum in Kildare Street in Dublin, and I believe they still have them in the basement there or whatever. Full range of what was produced here. There was even a shovel of an enormous size made for shoveling coal on the Tralee docks, a short handle on it, but the shovel was made out of iron, and it was really heavy, and with nothing at all on it, you'd be exhausting yourself swinging it around, not to mind having it piled high with stuff. You know, you'd have to be a serious man to work with these darn things in those days, you know. Well, there are always animals being brought in here for me to fix up. A lot of veterinary sort of stuff gets brought here if they're wildlife forms, and I splint their wings and get them flying again. I even fix up bats, and I've invented special little splints for bat wings, and it's all very satisfying for me to see these little guys flying off again. But we have a swan down there at the moment. He's broken his just the humerus here, and this part of the wing is sort of dying. It's damaged. There's nearly no blood supply to here. It's shriveling up. But I strapped it up at the moment, and he's happy, but he's not going to fly. And of course, a swan is one of the few birds that can live happily ever afterwards, walking and swimming and not necessarily having to fly. So he can live out his life quite happily here. And I feed him well, and he knows he's on a good thing, you know. He's okay. But so we can go down in a minute, and I'll feed him. With a swan, you need to feed a swan in a bowl of water because their beak is very unable to pick up little pieces off the ground, and it needs to be moist as well. They're used to sorting out things in water. Their beak is a little bit like a whale's mouth, the way their tongue moves, and the serrated edge of their beak and everything. They can bring things in, taste them, decide whether they're edible or not, sort them out with their tongue, swallow them or release them. But like that, they're very, very clever at well, and very capable of dealing with food in water. They're vegetarians, of course, and they're very easy to feed. They eat a lot of local floating sweetgrass and all that kind of thing around the edges of the river and so on, and they're easily minded, you know. The I get a phone call very often from the ISPCA. They're out picking up injured swans and whatever. And this one was out in front of the Opera House in Cork, and I went down and caught it myself. I have a swan catcher. It's just a stick with a little loop of wire at the end of it, and you can stick it into your shoe and walk along. They don't see you carrying something, and you can lift it out and just put it around their neck, and then just put your arm around them and walk home with them. The swan can't do you any harm. People are afraid that they're going to. There's all sorts of stories about it, but really it's just to keep people from interfering with them. But of course, a big, strong male swan can be stroppy, and he can be very aggressive, and he can slap his feet off the ground and put his wings out and look very threatening. And but they don't threaten anybody around here. They're not doing any harm. You could get frightened, all right, if you didn't know that they were unable to hurt you. You could put your hand out and let him bite your hand. It's a very leathery beak. If you were feeding him and you put your hand there instead of the bread, he'd rattle his beak around you. He can't do you any harm. They're a very harmless bird. But, you know, it's best to keep people a little bit sort of wary of them, because you don't want people to interfere with them, you know. So, from Monard's point of view, well, from my point of view, working here, living here and all that, there was a number of small houses here that I started living in one, and I'd fix it up, and as soon as it was fixed up I would sort of back out and everything's lovely, and I'd give it to somebody else, let it, and move to the next one and camp in a house half built while it was being fixed up, and I was enjoying it. I was by myself for quite a while, and I wasn't expecting to share it with anybody in the conditions that I was fixing it up at, but I went from house to house that way, and of course I got married, and I even got remarried, because things don't always turn out the way you hope they will. But it was one of these situations where I deal in aesthetics as well as the environment. So environmental aesthetics would be something that I would be busy at all the time. I like setting the scene for setting wildlife. I've done a lot of that, putting wildlife sanctuaries together and national parks and all that kind of thing. I've been involved in that kind of thing. And locally we have Cloughin Milk and Fen sanctuary down there that I designed as well in its present form. And you'll see my name on the posters down there, or the signposts. But it's just that the whole business of the glen here, it happened over 40 odd years with me in charge and setting the scene for what goes on in here, and doing the same outside for other people who wanted me to give them the benefit of my experience and my point of view and my attitude to in encouraging wildlife. We keep hearing about things getting scarce and getting rare and so on all the time. If you recreate their habitat, nearly all these creatures, everything, all the creatures are habitat dependent. If you recreate the habitat again, they're back overnight. It's as easy as that. Things aren't lost. They're only lost if we keep behaving the way we are as humans. Our needs become a sacred right. We're a very strange species in that way. We feel we have to have something, or it's profitable for us, or whatever, and then we justify doing what needs to be done from our point of view to make profit on it, or to do what we feel we've convinced ourselves about. If we have a little sensitivity and a little bit of healthy attitude to the other species we're sharing our country and our lives with and our world with, we can get along. It doesn't spoil our standard of living by reducing everything. And I meet people who talk about, oh, that's vermin and this is terrible, and oh, you have to control that, and this, you know. An awful lot of things are managing themselves very well. If you go to a part of the world where there's no humans around, why aren't we up to here in solid foxes and other things? There's just as many there as there are here when we leave things alone. Everything manages itself very well. There are an awful lot of standard points of view around that people give to their sons and daughters and so on that are not accurate. You'll still hear people saying that, oh, if you're in a place where there's badgers, put lots of sticks into your boots, so that when the badgers come out and grab you by the leg, like as they're all standing by waiting to beg for somebody else, that they'll feel the sticks breaking and they'll think they've broken your leg and they'll go away and leave you alone. Like, people telling each other these sort of stories still. It's like something that you'd expect way back in the Dark Ages if people told them that sort of thing at all. But there's a lot of old nonsense going on, a lot of old tripe being issued. People should go to the trouble of finding out what's the up-to-date, best understanding of each species and its part to play in our environment. And let us admire and appreciate and enjoy our surroundings and live happily ever afterwards, for goodness sake.